Roman Abramovich made his billions when Russia was the Wild East. Gangsterism was raging as the old Soviet cake was carved up. Corruption was rife. So where did the money come from?
It comes from Russia, doesn't it? And whatever he does over there.
What does he do over there?
I ain't got a clue, actually. But I'm sure it's all above board.
Roman Abramovich doesn't like to talk about his past, his wealth, or how he came to be in such a position at the tender age of 38. And the money?
His money? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that one.
Who knows?
Who cares?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Let's not ask that one, eh?
Siberia, 5 million square miles of nothing very much. For much of the year, it's a frozen wasteland. But to understand the revolution in English football, I travelled 1,400 miles northeast from Moscow to just south of the Arctic Circle. Out here, in what is the middle of nowhere, is the source of Abramovich's wealth: oil. Beneath me, about 2 miles beneath me, is where the money came from to buy Chelsea Football Club. Roman Abramovich is the main owner of Sibneft, the Siberian oil company, which is one of the biggest in Russia. It alone pumps out 700,000 barrels a day, and that's worth a bob or two in anyone's language. In the 1970s, the Soviet government shipped in thousands of workers here to pump out the black gold. Think of a subpolar Peckham or Middlesbrough on ice, and you've got Novosibirsk. Since Abramovich's Sibneft company took over, they've tarted up the decor. At minus 30, the only things that aren't frozen are your assets. Pay is good, but even here, people question how come a tiny handful of billionaires like Roman Abramovich got their hands on Russia's oil.
Natural resources were our country's strength, but all of it was given to private individuals. A few people now own it all. The top people own all the natural resources, the forests, the land, everything. But what about the ordinary people? No one knows what will happen to us. We don't even know how we'll survive.
But Abramovich is nothing if not a survivor. So what drives him?
Roman Abramovich's mother died when he was still a little baby, and then his father died in an accident. So Roman was brought up as an orphan. His childhood and his school years were in Ukhta, a very small place, almost on the polar circle, that's way up north, kind of a place where people perish.
But the young Abramovich fled the frozen north and pitched up in Moscow, just in time to witness the death throes of the Soviet Union. As communism collapsed, Abramovich went capitalist. He flogged, they say, anything and everything, from car tires to cuddly toys. The early 90s were wild times in Russia, as a new breed of fabulously wealthy businessmen was born: the oligarchs. One of the first was Boris Berezovsky. In the old days, he'd been a star mathematician. Then he swapped calculus for car dealing.
Our company created a market for the car business in Russia. At that time, I opened the dealership of Mercedes, of Volvo, of General Motors, Chrysler, Daewoo, Honda. And we were leading dealer in Russia.
Early on, the oligarchs realized that to make money in the new Russia, it's not what you know, it's who you know. By '95, Berezovsky was a key member of what was nicknamed the family.
The family, first and foremost, was President Yeltsin and a few other people who were members of his family and who, because of the president's illness, took over the responsibility of leading the government. They took it upon themselves to rule this country without having any legal right to do so.
At the age of just 28, Abramovich, seeing his chance of making millions, hitchhiked a ride on Berezovsky's coattails.
Abramovich asked me to introduce to Mr. Yumashev. That time Yumashev was very close to Yeltsin, and later on Yumashev became head of administration of Mr. Yeltsin, and later on Yumashev became husband of Yeltsin's daughter, Tatiana.
Abramovich was called the family's wallet. Mr. Abramovich, Tatiana Dyachenko, and Mr. Yumashev were the inseparable trio who had a huge influence on national politics in this country.
When people said that Abramovich was the Yeltsin family wallet, what did they mean?
Well, I think they were trying to imply that he became a close friend of the family, that he introduced certain members of Yeltsin's family circle to things like shares, credit cards, foreign bank accounts, offshore companies owned by beneficiaries that are hidden from public view. And probably Abramovich was the man who explained to them that there are other ways of managing your income.
But Yeltsin and his cronies were in a little bit of hot water. Unlike Abramovich and the other oligarchs, ordinary Russians were not gorging at the capitalist trough. And with an election looming, the communists looked like making a comeback. Behind in the polls, Yeltsin needed little short of a miracle. Enter the oligarchs.
It also happened, of course, that these oligarchs control now most of the television networks and the newspapers. And so they were able to use the media to change voters' opinions. So Yeltsin, instead of appearing to be alcoholic and not in command of his senses, suddenly became very active. He was shown giving stipends to students and pensions to the elderly. He went off to China. And what happened then came the election. Yeltsin won by a substantial margin, 52%. Now comes payback time. And so the oligarchs come up to Yeltsin and said, well, we helped you win. It was in our interest, but you owe us something.
And when it comes to payback, how about an oil field the size of, say, Wales? Abramovich had set his sights on the Siberian oil company Sibneft. It was flogged off by the Yeltsin government in a series of auctions in 95 and 96. Surprisingly, there was only one bidder, a company owned by Roman Abramovich and Boris Berezovsky.
I know all about the privatization of Sibneft because we investigated the case. I know how Sibneft was auctioned. 51%, the controlling stake, was sold to companies affiliated to Abramovich, who was working with Berezovsky at the time. The whole auction was organized by companies associated with Abramovich and Berezovsky. It wasn't a real auction. It was his closeness to the family which enabled Abramovich to acquire Sibneft. He would never have acquired it otherwise.
Sibneft, now worth $15 billion, was auctioned for just $150 million. Abramovich and Berezovsky insist that no one else was prepared to take the gamble, one which was to earn them a markup of 10,000%. Abramovich's spokesman, John Mann, says that his boss was just in the right place at the right time.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a great example. In Moscow, in 1995, you could buy an apartment for $10,000. An apartment in Moscow today will cost you $2,000 per square meter. So anyone who bought assets in the mid-90s, and like I was saying, if they were able to turn them around, they were able to add value to them, those assets are now worth more. And the great amount of wealth that's attributed to Mr. Abramovich and to some of the other major businessmen in the country is not liquid cash, it is their shareholdings in companies that bought for less money, turned around, and made more valuable.
In fact, Abramovich has converted much of his worth into liquid cash, bucket loads of cash. Since 2000, Sibneft has paid astronomical dividends.
Dividends are what a company pays to its shareholders. They're like interest on a building society account, except they are the profit being paid back to the shareholders. Now, very often dividends are of the same sort of rate of return as you might get on a building society account, but not in Sibneft. In Sibneft, it's been paying out dividends of up to $1 billion a year. So whoever's receiving these dividends is getting pretty wealthy on the back of this.
We produce consolidated accounts that are completely transparent and show where all of the money from all of the oil we produce goes and how it's, and what taxes are paid, etc. I think Sibneft's been very transparent.
Transparent, he said. But when you start looking beneath the surface, then things become a little bit more murky. According to an investigation by the Russian Audit Commission, in 2001, Sibneft paid out $1 billion in profits to 5 companies, all of them with some distinctly un-Russian sounding names. Carbon Row, Craven, Gemini, Marticello, White Pearl. So what exactly lies behind these fancy sounding names? Well, funnily enough, the answer to that question lies here, in sunny Cyprus. Four of the 5 companies that apparently own Sibneft are based on an island not best known for its oil, still less its snow. So who are the people behind the companies behind Sibneft? This is the place in Nicosia where the records are kept. So let's go and have a look. The first of the 4 companies I decided to look at was Carbon Row Limited. And that's the number of the company. So who owns Carbon Row Investments? Merit Service Trustees Limited. Question is, who owns Merit Service Trustees Limited? Merit Service Trustees, I want the owner.
This one, Dimitris Ioannidis.
Even I can read this. Dimitris, yes?
Yes.
And this is Ioannidis?
Ioannidis, yes. Certified accountant.
He's a certified accountant,
yes.
Okay.
The biggest shareholder.
What's the office address? The registered office?
Chrysanthou Milona.
Chrysanthou
Milona. Number 3.
Yeah.
Limassol.
Limassol. Let's go find Dimitris. So we're on our way now to track down Dimitri Ioannidis at 3 Chrysanthou Milona Street. On the face of the paperwork, he appears to be one of the world's richest men. Chrysanthou Milona Street seemed an unlikely centre for a multi-billion-dollar oil empire. And Merit Service Trustees Limited turned out to be a nondescript outfit flogging shell companies and the like. It's not immediately obvious why it should be advertising its wares in Russian. Hello, hi. I'm looking for Dimitri Ioannidis. My name's John Sweeney, I'm from the BBC.
You have a meeting with him?
I'd very much like to talk to him because I believe that he's the owner of Sibneft, the Siberian oil company. I've been told that Sibneft is a transparent company.
I don't know. There is no reason to take the camera. I know that I don't have anything against me, but...
Okay, so the camera can stay outside, but I can come in.
Yes.
Thank you. Very good. The man on the door at Merit Service phoned up Mr. Ioannidis to see if he wanted to meet me.
Because he's not in the office, he's at a client meeting. He asked me to tell you that he doesn't have to do anything with Sibneft.
He has nothing to do with Sibneft?
No, him personally.
He says that he's got nothing to do with Sibneft.
What would be the purpose of the meeting? What would you like to speak about?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate him on being one of the world's richest men, because it's a huge oil company. But the point is that Sibneft say that it's a transparent company, and the paperwork leads us here, and he says, I have nothing to do with Sibneft. So there is...
Maybe I misunderstood well, but I'm not related to this company.
Right.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
He's got our number. Thanks very much. Thank you. Dimitris Ionidis does work here, but he's not here at the moment, and he's nothing to do with Sibneft. At least that's what somebody says. Whatever this is, it's not transparent. So what exactly is going on? Where is Roman Abramovich in all of this? Because, as every Chelsea fan knows, he's the main owner of Sibneft. So what's he doing? Hiding behind this bloke in Cyprus.
Cyprus is a very good place to put an offshore company. It has no tax if you pay your dividends from Russia or anywhere else into a Cyprus-based corporation. You do this to make it hard to, first of all, identify who really owns your shares, and secondly, to make it hard for anyone to work out whether they should be collecting some tax on that dividend or not.
The company is incorporated in Russia. It produces, international standard accounting. It is actually considered one of the more transparent companies in Russia.
Isn't it stretching the word transparent a little if one of the companies related to Sibneft is actually owned by a Greek Cypriot in Cyprus? What's he got to do with Russia's oil?
No, I mean, you're talking about the ownership structures of basically the trusts. There are trusts in place that hold his shares and the shares of some of the other shareholders. That has nothing to do with the operations of the company.
There seems to be nothing illegal about Abramovich maximising his profits by moving them offshore. But ever since the great oil giveaway under Yeltsin, there's been a feeling that Russia was robbed blind. Back in the late 90s, Russia's Prosecutor General Yuri Skiratov began to investigate allegations of bribery at the heart of Yeltsin's circle. Worried about where the investigation would lead, Yeltsin tried to fire Skiratov, but the Russian parliament refused to play ball. Then someone sent this videotape to a TV station. Skiratov claimed the tape was a fake, but when it was broadcast, his career as prosecutor was over, and so was his investigation into bribery in the Kremlin. What is less known is that Skiratov had also been investigating separate allegations that an oil company had been bugging Kremlin officials. And the name of the oil company? Sibneft.
Дело, связанное с Сибнефтью, начиналось с расследования.
The Sibneft case began with an investigation into the company's security operation. They were using illegal methods of surveillance for obtaining information.
Лицами собирало материалы.
They illegally tapped telephone conversations. Sibneft had a very powerful security apparatus. They were bugging Yeltsin's daughter, Tatiana, and other members of the president's family, and even government officials. We carried out searches, we seized documents, we had conclusive evidence.
Sibneft claimed the equipment found was only used inside the company for commercial security. By the end of '99, the oligarchs were in trouble again. Their old chum in the Kremlin was looking a bit shaky. The alternatives to Yeltsin didn't seem quite so oligarch-friendly. So Berezovsky, Abramovich and the others began looking for a replacement. Vladimir Putin used to be a colonel in the KGB.
And then, with all the might and power of the media owned by Boris Berezovsky, they started to build a huge propaganda campaign in support of Putin for presidency. And finally, Putin was elected.
With their man in the Kremlin, things seemed rosier for the oligarchs. And in 2000, Abramovich, still only 33, was about to step out of the shadows and into the financial Premier League. His road to mega riches was paved with aluminium. This is the world's second largest aluminium smelter in Krasnoyarsk, Siberia. This expanse of choking Soviet smokestacks produces 700,000 tons of aluminium a year. Now that's a lot of baker foil in anyone's language. But to really understand Russia's multi-billion-dollar aluminium industry, you need to drive a few miles out of town. You need to come here, This is Krasnoyarsk's Boot Hill. It's the final resting place of several executives who got in too deep. This is how they do hostile takeovers in Krasnoyarsk. Throughout the 1990s, managers, bankers and journalists bit the dust. They called it the Aluminium Wars. One of the men at the center of the allegations of murder and gangsterism is Anatoly the Bull Boykov. The former local PE teacher and his associates leapt at the business opportunities of the new Russia. They cashed in when Krasnoyarsk's aluminium smelter came up for grabs and made millions of dollars. But, like all entrepreneurs, he had to live with the competition. How many times did someone try and kill you?
Many times.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
3, 4, maybe 5 times. They tried to blow up my car. They shot at me. Well, they planted car bombs. Another time they tried to assassinate me by shooting me. But I think God is with me.
Who sent the men to kill you?
I can't tell you exactly who these people were. Maybe just someone who didn't want me alive. There are a lot of people like that.
Out here in the Wild East, communism had given way to a violent form of capitalism. As the would-be metal barons fought to get control of the aluminium business, worth billions, there were few rules and little mercy. Every big player wanted a piece of the action.
This was a Russian-style industrial war, where you took plants for nothing. In the Western world, when there is a hostile takeover, this means that you are paying more for the shares. In Russia, it means you are paying nothing.
Meanwhile, Boykov, having survived the cut, thrust and car bombs of the aluminium business, had become chairman of the board of the Krasnoyarsk smelter, and some think of a local celebrity. But his stock fell when Boykov was politely asked to help police with their inquiries, Russian style.
That's right. I was arrested twice, once for attempted murder and the second time for a conspiracy to murder. But the murder was staged in order to stop me from getting into local politics.
He was convicted of conspiracy to murder, but Boykov to this day claims that his arrest was a setup to force him to sell up. Who wanted to buy your share of the aluminium business?
Russian aluminium.
And who owns that? Who owns that?
At that time, there were a number of people. It was Roman Abramovich, Boris Berezovsky, and Oleg Deripaska.
While Boykov languished in jail, a new company emerged as an even bigger beast in the aluminium jungle. Suddenly, Abramovich had become a player in the aluminium business. Backed by the power of the Kremlin, he bought out the warring factions. With fellow oligarch Oleg Deripaska, he formed one of the largest aluminium companies in the world. The deal was to net Abramovich, some claim, $2 billion. There's no suggestion that Abramovich had any part in the aluminium wars, but after Russian aluminium took over, the killing stopped.
It is true that since they came to control their industries, the industry that they control, the killings, the contract killings, murders, and many other unpleasant things never happened again. There was a blood trail that ended since Deripaska and Abramovich took over.
But it must follow, then, that Deripaska and Abramovich are actually more powerful than the gangsters.
Well, good observation. They may be more powerful than the gangsters.
The charge in the aluminium business is that he had to brush up against gangsters. He bought them out. And to do that, he had to be a bit of a gangster himself.
No, I would not say he's a gangster. If you ever meet him, he's a very congenial guy. I think he's just smart, and he's a few steps ahead of everyone.
But staying a few steps ahead wasn't getting any easier. The ex-KGB president was proving to be less congenial than his vodka-soaked predecessor. In 2000, Putin was waging total war in Chechnya and crushing any opposition at home. Abramovich's old master, Boris Berezovsky, began to use his media empire to expose a despot in the making. Not a good career move.
When Putin was first seriously criticized and attacked by the press, including the press owned and controlled by Boris Berezovsky, he interpreted this not as a genuine public criticism, but as a conspiracy created and led by Boris Berezovsky. And his answer was, get out of the country.
Berezovsky, facing fraud charges, swapped Moscow for Mayfair. But he still controlled large chunks of the Russian media, the most important being the TV station, ORT. To rectify the situation, Putin turned to the master's apprentice for help.
I left Russia. Abramovich traveled to France and asked me to sell ORT shares. And Abramovich came and said that he came from Putin, asking me to sell to him these shares. I said that I don't have any reason to sell.
So Abramovich made him an offer, as they say, he couldn't refuse. Sell this company to me at below market value, or you'll be in deep trouble with the president of Russia. Berezovsky was safe in London, but he had a friend, Nikolai Glushkov, in jail in Moscow. And he alleges that Abramovich offered Glushkov's liberty as part of the deal.
He said, if you sell, Putin will release Glushkov, my friend, who Putin put in jail. Under this condition, I agree. And Abramovich said, but for sure we'll not pay you 100% of real price. We'll pay you 20% of real price. And they paid me $170 million for my shares of ORT and never release Glushkov. Never release Glushkov.
But you're saying that Putin and Abramovich on this deal were in bed together?
Correct. You're absolutely correct.
It's not a bad way to do business. You could call it the Kremlin connection. Abramovich has always disputed Berezovsky's version of events. What is not contested is that following the sale, Abramovich handed control of the TV station to allies of Putin. In one stroke, Abramovich the apprentice had cast his master aside and become the Kremlin's #1 oligarch. The sale of ORT was part of an onslaught on freedom of speech in the media, and independent journalism on Russian TV was switched off. Vladimir Putin has made it clear that in his democracy you can make dollars so long as you don't rock the boat. And Abramovich has been careful not to make the same errors as Berezovsky. Back in '99, he was looking for a seat in the Russian parliament, the Duma. A vacancy came up in Chukotka, a handy 9 hours flight and 9 time zones away from the Kremlin.
When he went out there and saw the place, his immediate answer was, oh no. After some convincing, he did it. He was very involved, and he set up a charity to help out the kids in Chukotka. I think what happened was, at some point he realized that to do what he wanted to do to help the place, he needed more control and more say over what was going on over there, and that's why he ran for governor.
Since becoming governor, he spent millions of dollars rebuilding Chukotka. But there was another reason for Abramovich's interest in the region. It was to do with Sibneft, his oil company.
Sibneft isn't like a Western oil company in very many ways. I've looked at the accounts of quite a lot of Western oil companies, and one of the things that characterises them is quite high tax payments. They quite often pay more than 30%. If we look at Sibneft, that's quite different. They're paying on their 2003 accounts about 7.5% corporation tax, the equivalent figure in their accounts. Now that's a very low rate of tax.
And that's where Chukotka came in. From Siberia, the Sibneft oil was sold at knockdown prices to companies based in Chukotka. The enterprising Chukchis then sold the oil back to Sibneft's refinery at a massive profit. Sibneft then paid tax on the profit in Chukotka. Except in Chukotka, there was no local tax.
So it serves as, as a tax haven, as a political base. But in the meantime, also, Abramovich gets credit for being humane, for helping the local peoples who do vote for him because they, here comes Santa Claus.
And just like Santa Claus, Abramovich brought his reindeer, hundreds of them, flown in to help the local population.
The native population there breeds reindeer, and the reindeer herds were down to about 20% or 25% of what they were at the beginning of the decade, because people were starving, they had to eat them.
So the reason he went there wasn't because there was a huge tax break of enormous benefit to him. It's because he wanted to help out with the reindeer.
I think it was a new project for him. At that point, he was already a very well-to-do businessman.
It wasn't tax, it was the reindeer that...
I'm not saying it's the reindeer, but I think he wanted to help the people. Yeah, we got tax breaks, but that money was reinvested. And if you got to Chukotka now, you'll see really substantial change in the quality of life for the average citizen.
The billionaire oligarchs have done well out of the switch from Soviet communism to raw capitalism. But while they've cashed in, many have not. In spite of its fabulous oil wealth, Russia has a GDP lower than that of Costa Rica. The gap between the mega-rich and the many poor has led some to despise the oligarchs, none more so than Roman Abramovich. Buying up Chelsea meant the flaunting of his wealth, and that angered Mother Russia. But there are reasons why British taxpayers might have worries about where Abramovich's money comes from. And here's one. These confidential documents concern a bitter dispute between a company controlled by Roman Abramovich and the Fat Lady, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, a bank which is funded in part by the British taxpayer. The European Bank was set up in the early 90s when taxpayers across Europe clubbed together to give a leg up to the old Iron Curtain economies. By 1998, I'm going to have to pay attention here, the European Bank had lent millions of dollars to a Russian bank called SBS Agro. 7 years on, and that loan to SBS Agro is still causing a lot of aggro. The European Bank, not being daft, had demanded collateral for the loan. SBS Agro pledged another loan worth $14 million from a company called Runicom SA. And this is where Abramovich comes in. Runicom SA earned millions of dollars selling Sibneft's oil abroad. The company was based in Switzerland. In 1998, Russia was hit by a financial crisis. Loads of Russian banks, including SBS Agro, went into meltdown. No problem, one would have thought, because the loan was guaranteed by Abramovich's wealthy Swiss company, Runicom SA. But there was a problem. Because when the bank asked for the money, Runicom SA said, "Ah, cheese." Concerned about the prospect of losing millions of pounds of public money, the bank started an investigation. They discovered a previously unknown connection between SBS Agro and Abramovich's oil company, Sibneft. And the bank was astonished to discover that the lucrative oil business had been transferred from Runicom SA in Switzerland to another company, this time in Gibraltar, called, wait for it, Runicom Limited. The European Bank took a dim view of this financial sleight of hand and took Runicom SA to court in Moscow. After 2 years of legal arguments, Runicom SA was ordered to pay $17 million, but to no avail. The money had flown. Runicom SA is now bankrupt, but the bank is launching fresh legal actions, this time against the people behind the company, and that includes Roman Abramovich. The bank's case is that Runicom SA was illegally emptied of funds. The potential losers, Europe's taxpayers, and one of the winners, Roman Abramovich. And his missus. Because, as well as shifting its assets to the Gibraltar company, the paperwork also says that Runicom SA spent £12,000 on beauty treatment for Mrs. Abramovich. And that's a lot of cucumber in anyone's language. Abramovich and the directors of Runicom SA vehemently deny the charges and intend to fight the case. The European Bank maintains that it is owed millions of dollars, and the bank is owned in part by the British taxpayer. And this story ain't over until the fat lady sings. While Abramovich faces serious legal trouble from the European Bank, back in Moscow he appears, for now, untouchable. Other oligarchs are not doing as well. Berezovsky has been granted political asylum in Britain. The only Russian richer than Abramovich has been arrested for fraud and jailed. Many feel that Mikhail Khodorkovsky's real crime was to challenge the man in the Kremlin. In Russia, it seems, the chaos and gangsterism of the 90s is being replaced by a new force.
When you ask a Russian, for a time when I never had to ask a Russian, does the mafia bother you? They'd say, well, what do you mean, the private mafia or the state mafia? And now increasingly it's the state mafia.
In the 10 years since he was introduced to Boris Yeltsin's inner circle, Roman Abramovich has accrued a personal fortune of around $12 billion. He can earn as much in a week as David Beckham earns in a year. And for Abramovich, if continuing to prosper means cozying up to a man who's fast becoming Russia's latest tyrant, well, so be it.
Abramovich, from the very beginning, from 2000, when Putin was elected, strongly decided to support Putin. It doesn't matter what Putin prepared to do in Russia. Abramovich doesn't care what is Russia, how Russia will be developed, democracy or authoritarian. Abramovich chose his way to be close to Putin.
But on a wet Wednesday night at Stamford Bridge, the troubles of Russia are a world away. Does it matter where the money comes from?
Not if we're successful and if we're winning, no.
No, it don't matter.
As long as Chelsea win, I don't care.
As long as we've got the best team in London, that's all I'm worried about.
It doesn't really matter to me where it comes from.
Roman Abramovich, what do you think to him?
He's an arsehole, we're West Ham.